Welcome to Digital Teaching and Learning in Theater. So we are going to look at the DOE resources. We're going to look at the self-paced digital teaching infographic. Some of you may have seen that already. If not, I'll show you how to get to that, how you can use it. The DOE digital learning courses that we have available. Then we'll talk about the Georgia theater teachers, what they have recommended. And then we're going to talk about digital teaching and theater best practices and some key elements underneath that, as well as what's going on with the Georgia home classroom and what fine arts can offer there. And then wrap it up with relationships, routines, and communication, which is going to be different for everybody in every different situation. And then Georgia teacher examples that have been successful in this digital world. So that is the plan. So the link there is to the Fine Arts website. If you've not been to the Fine Arts website, here it is. This is the digital teaching and learning infographic. If you click on this, it actually takes you to a PDF page, which looks like this. And each of these areas are 10 total self-paced lessons for digital teaching in the arts. You start here with an introduction, gives you sort of an overview of how to use this Choose Your Own Adventure. And then there's digital best practices across the board, what our professional development opportunities are, not only through the DOE, but also in each of the major arts organizations, including, say, EDTA, AATE, and things like that. Instructional Resources has a video, as well as how to understand the Georgia Standards of Excellence, tools for teaching digitally in art, and then we have 3 separate ones for teaching and performing digitally for dance, music, and theater. I will say most of the information on the theater digital portion is in this presentation, but the rest of this has some more nuance that you might want to check out. And then Arts Unplugged, what does that look like? Because a lot of areas actually have 0 connection. There are some districts that are dropping off packets and driving to students' homes. In addition to that, there is a DOE course in the PLO. It's the same location that you would find the dramatic writing course and the early childhood courses for music and visual art. There's a Just in Time for Digital Teaching put out by the DOE. It's actually a really good course if you're starting out or just want to know sort of what are the recommendations about best practices for digital teaching. This is a really great resource. I got a lot out of it myself. It does go over some basic tools and platforms that are recommended by the state. All of these things are also recommendations. Nothing is top down. It's just, is this supplemental? Can you use this? And I will say, even though the course recommends these particular platforms, it doesn't necessarily mean that your district recommends those platforms. So you do need to check with your district to make sure that you are on the same page in terms of what's acceptable and what's allowed. There are some districts that won't allow YouTube, for example, whereas DOE has no problem with YouTube. Some districts are exclusively on Zoom, some exclusively on Microsoft. So these are the things that come out of that class, that particular course: the Prezi, Pick to Chat, Remind, S'more, Office, Sway, Padlet, Pick to Chart, and Flipgrid, and then Storyboard, ThingLink, Wordle, Kahoot, Quizlet, Quizzes. A lot of these things actually were being used in the classroom before the digital push came. And then the social media recommendations, these are all things that you find in that course. We also have talked to Georgia teachers, and these are the platforms that they found to be most useful. Flipgrid has been huge because you're allowed to post small snippets. It's very easy to use from elementary through secondary. The other one that's been very, very popular is Google Classroom, but that of course depends on whether or not your district is Google friendly. Zoom is exclusive to certain counties and then absolutely forbidden in others. And then the others that sort of got a second runner-up is OneNote, GroupMe, Microsoft Teams, and Infinite Campus. And I say second runner-up, there are lots of groups using this. Just the largest ones happen to be Zoom and Flipgrid. These were the go-to resources that the Georgia theater teacher folks that responded to the short little survey, they suggested that they've been using in the classroom. And again, this is from the spring. PBS Learning Media, which is pretty handy. We have used that as well. It's got a lot of information for younger grades, elementary, early middle school. Not as much for secondary education and theater, but it does have stuff. YouTube is extremely popular, but that only works if your district is comfortable with YouTube. USITT, this Shakespeare is actually representing the Shakespeare just bevy of information online. If you go to MIT Shakespeare, all of his works are there. Theater Folk is another thing that comes up a great deal. Digital Theater Plus is expensive and costs money, but it's a phenomenal resource in terms of being able to show filmed versions of live theater. And then GPB Classroom is something that we're actually involved in as well. This has resources for students, teachers, and parents to engage in classroom lessons. It's got lesson plan structures as well in there, and we'll look at some of those later in the presentation. And then backstage and stage partners. What does digital theater look like? The long and short of it, it's supposed to look exactly like the actual non-digital classroom. The content remains the same. The standards remain the same. The artistic processes remain the same. The only thing that's different is the space. Now, we have a very specific and unique challenge with that because the nature of what we do, it requires space. It's 1/3 of our basic elements, right? We've got performer, audience, and space in which to be. And we have drastically changed that. We still have space if you're using a synchronous platform like this, because I could, if I had your cameras up, for example, I can see you, I can hear you, and it works if you've got the ability real time in the performance to hear and receive feedback of those watching you. The minute you don't have that, it stops being theater. So it is a little tricky because you're not always going to be in a situation where you can do live theater, but live theatrical performance is only a piece of the larger whole of what we're doing. What does it look like to maintain the standards and the infrastructure that we've had before? It's a good idea to point out sort of what is available to support you on lesson plans and instructional resources. These are where we house our 3,000 instructional resources. Now, they're not all for theater. You can get to them multiple ways. You can go through your SLDS platform. You could also go through georgiastandards.org and click on the new TRL public link here. That will not track where you're from, and it won't give you a small folder to build your own reserve, but it will take you directly to the searchable engine there on the TRL. But we recommend using the GaDOE Fine Arts page, which I'm going to bring back over here, because on that page, we have, if you've not been there, we have instructional resources listed, and then for each of these instructional resources, you can click on the link, which is right above. There's theater here. It's going to have the resources for 6 through 8, middle school, acting 1, advanced drama, fundamentals of theater, acting and production for film, dramatic writing 1, and musical theater, as well as technical theater. And it looks like this. And this is why it's a little bit easier, more friendly to use than the search engine. So the way this is laid out is the PDF will have general resources not tied to a unit, and then per class it will have the unit, it will have the unit plan, the lesson plan, and then any resources associated with that lesson plan. So if we scroll down here past all of middle school to high school, you can see for fundamentals here, we've got the unit plan, then to the lesson plan, then to the materials with that lesson plan, and that includes whatever your assessments are. Here are all your assessments, for example, for improvisational theater. So that's how you get to that, and you can find all of that support there. Basically, all of the lesson plans that are aimed at the regular live classroom can be converted to digital lesson plans, and we're going to talk about some ways people have done that in the past. So I've already told you the basic class layout of what is available and what courses are written. Again, these are also supplemental. If you're doing something that works in your classroom for a course and it looks nothing like the structure that is there on the DOE website, great, that's fine. The only thing the PSC is concerned about is, did you teach the standards? How you teach the standards is entirely up to the expert in the classroom and to the district. So these are really just instructional resources, although they function like a curriculum. If you wanted to, as you were a new teacher and you wanted to print off 180 days for a course, you could have the whole thing ready to go right there. So each course will have a curriculum map. The curriculum map lays out not only the activities that you would associate with that particular unit, but the individual standards by code in that unit. Each area of the curriculum map has a unit plan. The unit plan will go over the standards associated with the unit. It will also have the list of lesson plans, the types of assessment, diagnostic, formative, and summative, and then any additional links. And most of these are now hyperlinked into the actual TRL, so you can click from the unit plan to specific lesson plans. But if for any reason those aren't working or something has gone amiss, you can always find it in the TRL by searching the same name. Lesson plans, these are hands down the most useful part of this. Each lesson plan has suggested pacing. This is all based on sort of an idea of an hour-long course. They have enduring understanding, which ties your lesson to outside disciplines, technical focus, a list of all the Georgia Standards of Excellence specifically for that technical focus of that lesson plan, and then the assessments. If it mentions a specific assessment in the TRL, or excuse me, in the lesson plan, that means that lesson plan assessment exists in the TRL. You can pull it up and actually use it. Major concepts for the unit, and then differentiated learning. So that's adapted assignments as well as assignments for increased rigor. Student teaching materials is there, and then last but not least is there's a lesson structure. It will have a hook, it will have a middle, and then it will have some sort of end. Some of the lesson plans are single day, like one-offs, and then others are multi-weeks. And even in those multi-week lessons, it'll have that three-part structure so that you can figure out how you might want to make that work in your own classroom. The assessments, as I mentioned, for each lesson plan, there is a diagnostic suggestion, formative assessment, summative assessment. They're not all rubrics, but some of them are. And if they are rubrics, they'll be tied directly to a standard there, which makes communication with admin that haven't necessarily gone through arts training or arts programs understand why that game you're playing actually is a legitimate academic exercise. And then we have other resources in there. In the other resources, we have a series of PowerPoints. We have some videos, we have handouts and worksheets, things that are related to the actual task. The handouts for the individuals that are running a production, for example, like the timesheet for the stage managers that were developed, those are really, really useful tools. So if you've not had a chance to check this out, please go look at it. It may come in handy, particularly when you have to post additional materials to make things easier to understand in the digital world. So that's what we have, but they're not all digital in that particular setup. Some of them very easily you can see how they would be, and some of them are a little bit more harder to wrap your mind around. So we're going to shift gears just a minute and talk about what best practices are for digital teaching in the arts. Generally speaking, digital literacy and citizenship is now your job too. Just like you used to have to push for literacy in general in the classroom, now it's how to interact online. That is something you have to be aware of what your district says the rules are, and not only toe that line, but advocate for it. So it is important to go over some basic understandings of online safety, even though it seems obvious. So these are some basic tips. Obviously, the teaching and modeling what you want the students to do is important. It's difficult for students to do what you don't do in the classroom, which sort of goes without saying, but it's worth mentioning. Deleting digital content does not mean it has not been shared or downloaded. This is huge, particularly when we're talking about students who are performing and doing different things on video. It's really important that they understand that once it is shared, it exists forever. Copyright policy is something you do have to consider in a new way. And then photos, videos, and other content under public domain can be used freely, but you have to have a conversation with your students about what is public domain and what does that look like. So synchronous teaching, if you're not familiar, although it sounds very much like you are, is when you are teaching face-to-face. Like we are having a synchronous session right now. You have the ability to turn your cameras on. I can talk to you. We're having a real-time conversation, which for group projects, particularly if you're giving feedback, say if you're doing a show, that's much, much faster in a synchronous setting than individually recorded sessions where you have to occasionally type the same note to multiple actors. So there is a place definitely for synchronous session, but it's not necessarily the only way to go. Asynchronous learning would be obviously when you are not face-to-face on a digital platform like this. This would be anything from here's a lesson that I've posted as a video, you're supposed to watch this. It's the old flipped classroom idea. Or this also is unplugged sessions. So if you're dropping off packets and the student is journaling about the process. which is very awkward for some of the things that we do, but in some cases it's the only way to go about it, so we have to find a way to make those standards and tasks accessible to students, even if they have zero connection. Now, there is a huge debate as to which one is better, synchronous or asynchronous. The blended approach really is the main goal here. So in blended teaching and learning, you have a combination of synchronous and asynchronous setting or teaching. You can do classwork outside, the asynchronous, synchronous, and then the student response can either be synchronous or asynchronous, where the student is working as the last portion. And we've modeled that to some degree in our digital lessons. And that takes us to our GaDOE examples of digital lessons. So we just showed you all of the lessons that exist in the TRL for regular classroom. If you go to the Fine Arts webpage again, you can go to a section called Remote Learning, and in that Remote Learning, we hyperlink directly to these. These are in the TRL as well. You can find them, well, this one says music, obviously, but for theater. It'll say theater : then DLP for digital learning plan. We have in there right now middle school lesson plans available, an acting example available, an entire unit of fundamentals of theater, but to be fair, it is the playwriting unit, which is the easiest one to get across. Although we do have a section on stage readings there, so if you're looking for a model for how you can prepare a rehearsal or perform on a digital platform, you can sort of follow that. And then there's also a technical theater. These are just examples to look at. The reason I pulled them up is I want to show you the structure of them and how they look a little bit different. So for each of these, we have our enduring understanding and our essential questions, and we have our standard alignment there. And then we have the foundational information, concepts like where this fits, links to things that are helpful, and then the actual lesson plan starts. So most of these are going to be a part 1, part 2, part 3 session again. So this part 1, for example, has an actor warm-up. It has a video of students demonstrating what an actor warm-up could look like. And then it also has a vocal warm-up there from the TRL. It's not necessarily recommended in these that you just sort of click them and go. The idea behind these examples is this is how you could structure it, and then you make your own. But if you really are hard-pressed, all of these videos could be used in the classroom. For each section, in addition to having a synchronous, asynchronous approach, you also have an unplugged variation. So this suggests you either in a recorded session or live go through the warm-ups with your students. They could use these videos if they're asynchronous, or you do the warm-ups with them because obviously ensemble is still important in theater, and ensemble is very difficult to achieve in this setting. So whenever you can do something live to build relationships, you absolutely should take that opportunity. Or at least that's what I found working in performances, and I imagine very much the same in the classroom. So for part 2, after your opening session, there would be some sort of presentation of the information. So each of these talks about either in a live or recorded session of your own. It takes you to how you could use Google Meet or a similar program to create your own asynchronous video, but then each one will have its own video. So this Acting 1 unit video here takes you to the TRL video.
Character development, character analysis, and the given circumstances. Character is one of Aristotle's 6 components of theater. Character refers to the human beings represented in the play. Aristotle stresses that the central aim of theater is not to depict human personalities, but rather to represent human action. Character helps to control how that action is carried out on the stage.
But again, wherever possible, it's best if you you could watch these for structure, but it's best if you do it yourself. It will endear your students to you a little bit more than if they're hearing a foreign voice. And then after that, there is a description of what you could do in the classroom, again, synchronously or asynchronously, after the video so that they can make sure you understand what they're doing. And then an unplugged variation for how the student can do the same thing, even without the video. And that's where it becomes a little more complicated, particularly for performance. The unplugged variation will always have like a packet list of something that could be dropped off, but unplugged in this setting really does mean unplugged, like no internet connection at all. So that has been a challenge for some courses, but by and large, there's something that can be done in every situation, but you do have to rely on the student at least being able to find another living body to do some of the exercises, because as we all know, singing in the shower might be fun. It's not theater, though. You have to have that audience, you have to have that interact. So there is a need for the student to be on their own to do some of the stuff. Part 3 is where the student will actually do the work themselves. So this particular lesson plan is referring to a choice board that I'm going to show you later, where once they've had the interaction with the character analysis video, here is what they can do in each of the performing the artistic disciplines as an activity. And these include like building information about your character on TikTok, either as a biographical thing in your character's voice, or as though you are playing the character and doing the promotional work for that, which is a legitimate thing that actors are expected to do now. It is part of your contract when you take a major role that you will promote your production on social media. Most actors, when they go in to work for a company for the first time, they're asked questions, obviously. What is your social media following? How do you interact with social media? Which is very, very different from how it was even 3 years ago. So once you go through the explanation of all of these activities, and this one again has 4 different activities for the students to do because it is a choice board that we'll talk about how that works later. It has evidence of success, which is going to be our diagnostic, formative, and summative assessments, and then distance learning supports, which include, this is where you would find your differentiation. This is the same sort of setup that you would find in the other lesson plans. And then additional materials. And for all of these, we have School Theater, which is the EDTA acting resources thing linked. If you've not been to the EDTA Theater Educator Pro, that is invaluable. Another thing that was recommended when we were developing these digital lesson plans that I think is an excellent idea is the checklist. This checklist for each part has them the student go through and make sure they've done each of these things before they know they're finished. Because when you're not in the classroom directly, it is hard to know, have I done all the steps? Have I missed something because of the multiple platforms? On each of these digital lesson plan examples, and we are building more of these, you will have a full breakdown of the slides that went in with the video, and then a handout of actually what's in the video and said. And then a breakdown of what, like, this is part of that video. It talks about the choice board, which is impossible to read here, but I'm pulling it up at the very, very end. And then it has what some of the peer critique assessment would be. Any rubrics, anything that you would need for the actual assessment is at the bottom as to go in as part of that packet. So that's the structure of our digital lesson plans. We are slowly adding more of these into that Georgia Home Classroom. Relationships and student-to-student communication. So we are very used to building ensemble in the classroom and playing trust games and exercises and improv, and that still has to happen, which is difficult because we're very isolated in this digital setting. You don't always have cameras on, and you can't always even force cameras to be on, but you can do a lot of theater improv games in this setting, and rather than just throwing them to the side because they're harder, I would suggest that it's actually more important that we do more of that now that we're remote and we're digital. Getting the students up on their feet, finding a way to get up to play those games together with cameras on will allow them to actually manipulate the space so that they can have access to their voice and body, which is ultimately what we're trying to teach them to do in performance. But if you skip that step, it's just like skipping warm-ups, and you're never going to have that accessible. So I would advocate very, very hard for pushing to make sure that you're still building those relationships in the way in which you communicate, specifically with theater games and in that on-camera setting. Routine is going to be absolutely key. If you don't have the same routine, it's hard for the students to really grow on it. It's the same idea as needing a routine in your day-to-day lessons in person. So it's just doubly so when you're actually here in the in the digital world. So that lesson structure is part of that routine, obviously. The thing is, though, you have to decide what your district says the best lesson structure is, and then what, or under that umbrella, what you think the best structure is. That structure that's laid out in the GaDOE digital lesson plan may not work for you, and that's okay. That's absolutely fine, as long as you have an established structure that is communicated to the students and that's maintained so that they can grow within that framework. And then instructor communication. I feel that this is absolutely critical, although this is done very, very differently from district to district. Office hours, having a set of office hours that students can come in and meet. Some districts are doing it where you have office hours that you can call into, which also makes sense. Or you can schedule, I'm going to be at your office hour on this day, and then that way the teacher isn't just sitting there for a particular period of time during each week. But that availability is more important in this setting than it is when you don't have this, because you can't just have the student walk by your door anymore. And as someone pointed out at the very beginning of this, students are clever and are using the difficulty in technology as an example or as an opportunity to sometimes not do the stuff that they're not necessarily wanting to do or excited about doing. And as we well know, there's a lot of stuff in theater that is intentionally designed to push the artist a little bit further out of their comfort zone, sometimes extremely out of their comfort zone, in order to grow. So making sure that you're available so there are no excuses about digital technology not working, or so that you can talk through another way to access those skills, is really, really crucial. Instructions 2 ways, written, video. Calling on the phone is still a thing that can be done, but having it in multiple forms is twice as critical now than it was. It's not just about learning styles, it's what do you have access to and how can you read it effectively. Some students are doing their digital online learning on their phones. So this is more instructor communication, having the standards expressed very clearly in the lessons. That's why we have them in the lesson plans, both digitally and the non-digital lesson plans, as well as the unit plans. And then feedback. Written feedback is very, very helpful and very specific to the individual student, but it can be super labor intensive, particularly if you're talking about performance and if you're doing scene work, or if you're doing even monologue feedback is difficult written as opposed to synchronous, because after students hear the same kind of back and forth critical response feedback in a live setting where everybody's doing individual monologues, you don't have to keep repeating the same note. Whereas if it's written and if it's truly isolated and you're just responding to that video and no one hears the response, there's no public feedback, it's so labor intensive for the teacher that it's virtually undoable. As we're aware, a classroom of 30 trying to get through 1-minute monologues can take days, and that's in the regular setting. If you're having to do asynchronous written feedback for each monologue, while the students could get that information up very quickly, your ability to get it back as a single person is quite challenging. And then communicating the assessment when you're introducing the product is suggested. What we're going to look at real quick are a couple of Georgia teacher examples. These are in that infographic. If you've seen the infographic video, this is the same information here, but it's blown up and you can see it a little bit closer. If anybody's interested in these, I can send them to you as well. These are choice boards and a playwriting bake-off. So choice boards, they've been around forever. They are an assessment that has multiple options that you can choose from to demonstrate your mastery of the individual standard. This choice board is broken down by a teacher by artistic discipline and by content area, which I think is really interesting. So you cannot read this. I'm going to bring over a larger one. What she's done, though, is she's got the acting, the technical theater, and the musical theater approaches. So you could do this 2 ways. You could say, after your lesson, or after your character, you could say, I'm going to do the acting string, and I'm going to just select create and respond. Or I'm going to select perform and connect, and that's how I'm going to do it. In this particular lesson plan, though, it was for an advanced drama class. All 3 of the categories were available, and the student had to choose either the acting, the tech theater, or the musical theater, and then they had to do the task all the way across in create, perform, respond, and connect. And if you choose a character from one of the plays, you fill out the form in the character analysis form, so you should have a link to a Google form here. For the questions that do not have answers easily found in the text, use context clues. From here, begin to create ideas or a series of TikToks or short videos for Instagram posts as this character. So this is literally as the character. What would their social media look like? You can set this in current day or the world of the play. Suspend your disbelief and make the world come true. You can submit this through, she's using Schoolology. And she's got an option too. If you're not able or don't have permission to use that particular social media, either through your family or the district, you could do it in the style of. There are multiple ways to do this task. And then for perform, after you've planned out the videos, what the social media would look like is actually doing that task and then submitting specifically to the teacher privately. So it's not publicly posting these. That's really iffy. You can publicly post things. It's not recommended. And then responding is going to the individual students and responding appropriately using your basic understanding of critical response, which there's tons of lesson plans in the TRL about the critical response method, specifically that Liz Lerman approach, where what is the artist attempting, what stands out and resonates to you, what pulls you away from the work in progress, and then do you have any questions for the artist. So that structure still works here if you've got some sort of digital platform to share this information. And then connecting, she has theater is more than just about the performers and designers. How did the performance change the perspective in the world? Write a blog or post or record a vlog as you are an audience member watching the performance. So she's got them thinking about themselves as the character, as the actor, as a respondent, like a critical respondent, and then also as the audience. So it's really a comprehensive way to go about this. And if you leave it completely open, and it really is just choose one of these things, and then you could do it again. Say if you chose create and respond in your acting portion, when you're doing the tech thing, you have to do the perform and connect. That might be a way to go about this. And then musical theater is very much the same, but a little bit different as to what's being focused on. So that's the choice board. That's sort of how it works. It's all very easy to read. It's laid out. It's student friendly. They can see it before the assignment begins. They can see it after the fact. They don't have to make a decision beforehand. And it really does open it up so that the student, whatever their resources are, will be able to do the task at hand. The playwriting bake-off, switching gears, playwriting is obviously one of the more one of the easier ways to do theater education on the digital setting, because it's not actually performed, except that it is in the end stages. So a bake-off is essentially a 48-hour play setup. This is directly from Paula Vogel's website. They've got 48 hours. They've got essential elements that are assigned to them or drawn from a hat. They have 48 hours to put together a play. Obviously, this would fit very nicely in a playwriting unit for fundamentals of theater. It would also work in an advanced drama class. Playwriting is an essential standard for all of the performance classes if you look closely at the GSE. And then once they're done, you can share them, you can post them, you can comment on them, you can stage them, you can do staged readings, you can do Zoom readings, you can turn them into full performances. There are several variations of how advanced drama can work where you do have an entire section of writing and then you fully produce, and you can produce them on Zoom. So both of those are tasks in a little more detail that you might consider expanding to some of your other courses. So in the corner of the Fine Arts webpage, our social media is down here. We are GaDOE Fine Arts for Facebook, and then Twitter is @JessBooth. The reason we're pushing the social media here is while everything is on the website, there's a lot on the website, and the website doesn't change as often as social media does. We do 2 or 3 posts a day, and it's always about stuff that's coming up with deadlines. So this really is the fastest way to know exactly what's going on. If you are not comfortable with social media and you can't find something on the website, or you just have questions and want to talk, these are our contacts. Please shoot me an email if you have any questions about anything that you would like more information on, or something you think we could do to be a little more supportive. We would love to hear from you.
For additional questions, please contact the Fine Arts team. Jessica Booth, Paul McLean, Casey Hall.